Kuten niin monissa muissakin maissa, maahanmuutosta käydään kiihkeää keskustelua Suomessa. Minusta tuntuu, että mielipiteet edustavat usein ääripäitä, ja itsellenikin on ollut vaikea muodostaa omaa kantaani. Vastausten sijaan minulla onkin usein paljon enemmän kysymyksiä. 1800-luvun lopulla ja 1900-luvun alussa paljon suomalaisia lähti maahanmuuttajina Pohjois-Amerikkaan, Yhdysvaltoihin ja Kanadaan. Erityisen paljon ihmisiä lähti Pohjois-Pohjanmaalta, mistä minäkin olen kotoisin. Omasta suustani löytyy maahanmuuttajia. Ihmiset, kuten nykypäivänkin maahanmuuttajat, etsivät parempaa elämää itselleen ja jälkeläisilleen. Lähtömaassa ei ollut viljelysmaata, ruokaa tai työtä. Halusin seurata näiden suomalaisten maahanmuuttajien reittejä Atlantin ylittävällä laivamatkalla Yhdysvaltoihin ja kysyä siellä asuvilta Amerikan suomalaisilta monissa sukupolvissa, mitä maahanmuutto merkitsee heidän suvussaan ja mitä se merkitsee heidän omalle identiteetilleen. Voimmeko oppia historiasta vastataksemme nykypäivän maahanmuuton haasteisiin?
They left Karstila because there was no work, and the father, my great-grandfather, was not the firstborn son. He had no land. There was no more work in Sweden, so they decided to go to America. And I think at that time lots of people were leaving for America, and people weren't very happy about it, but they went nevertheless. And somehow wound up in Ashtabula, Ohio. We don't know how, but they opened a tavern near the harbor in an area of Ashtabula called the Harbor, a little bit of a rough side of the harbor area.
So many Finns emigrated from Finland, and they ended up in Norway and then coming to the U.S., or they came from Finland to Michigan, became miners, and worked in the mines up there, and then kind of gradually shifted out from there. But my great-grandpa was unique because he came directly from Tornio, early Tornio, to Minneapolis. He was a farmer. He had been a logger. He had been above Yli Tornio on the Tornio River logging. He ended up in Tornio, ended up working on a farm, ended up marrying one of the farmer's daughters, who was my great-grandma, and was involved with a little bit with religion. He met Lestadius, and so he was moved by his teachings. They decided to come to this country because there was no future for them in Finland, because it was poverty times and he had no chance for any inheritance as far as a farm was concerned. And so they had heard about Minnesota through two gentlemen from that area who had been here the year earlier and had somehow communicated that they had land available in Minnesota and that Minnesota was a good place. Well, he'd become a tailor as well, and so he was going to open a tailor shop in Minneapolis. But when they got to Minneapolis, they realized, my grandma says, it's way too big a city. We can't live in this big a city. And so he heard about the Homestead Act and the properties out here in Cokato. So they walked out the 50 miles from Minneapolis to Cokato. And this is when they stayed at the cabin the first winter, decided he wanted to homestead here. They staked out this piece of property and then spent the winter there, and then the next year they built the house here that we're in right now.
My father's family immigrated to a very large existing Finnish community in the Upper Peninsula in the Hancock and Houghton area, and so I think their integration was perhaps easier because they came to an existing, immigrant community where there was a lot of the foundations and the infrastructure based on what was already in Finland. And, they were dairy farmers, and, the Upper Peninsula is sort of similar, I guess, geographically to parts of Finland. So I suppose they were able to adapt, probably not easily, but they were able to adapt in a way that allowed them to sort of continue maybe their way of life, not exactly, but more or less.
For my mom, I think she hated being different than other kids and was always trying to fit in. And in fact, her name was Lisa Anneli Lasila, and she was 7 years old maybe when she changed her name from Lisa with 2 eyes to Lisa with 1 eye so that she could fit in as an American.
It was a constant fight around the iron ore mines between all the different nationalities. I mean, it was sometimes some pretty tough days in town there, and all the different things that were happening because of all the different nationalities that were involved in the iron ore mines, and the companies kept those fights going on at all times, keep the friction going. There was a lot of it going on in the 50s, even when I was graduating from school. It was still here.
It was the grandchildren of the immigrants that really moved up in the world in terms of getting higher educations and, you know, better jobs. Because my grandparents, all 4 of my grandparents born in the United States, spoke Finnish as a first language. And every single one of my aunts and uncles and my parents, except for one, never learned a word of Finnish. I mean, they would know enough Finnish to be able to sing in church. So in this case, this would be grandchildren of immigrants, and this is like the whole swath of Finnish American society in the Copper Country. You know, my grandparents' generation did not want my parents' generation to learn Finnish simply because they didn't want them to speak English with an accent. They wanted their children to be integrated. And this goes into maybe post-World War II too. You know, in that era of the United States, these different immigrant groups were coming together, you know, the Finns, Swedes, Norwegians, Germans. You know, as more people are speaking English, more people are moving up. I think they were, as a whole, these elements of society were coming together. But my grandparents, you know, like I mentioned, being born in America, they were still very, very much ethnic Finns. You know, they read the Finnish newspapers. They read, you know, Finnish books, and they were very proud. My grandfather, Oscar Randell, was very proud to be able to read the Bible in Finnish and English, and he had his Finnish Bible, which of course he preferred.
Kotikielemme, koska asuin isovanhempien kanssa, äitini isäni kanssa, että kotikielemme oli suomi, että ajattelimme suomalaisella tavalla, kauppat olivat suomalaisia, kirkko oli saarnettiin suomen kielelle, että kun alettiin kanssakouluun, huomasin, että jukelin tähän, mutta USAssa puhutaan enemmän englantia kuin suomea. Siis kotikielemme oli suomea.
Who of us who aren't a little bit Finnish or aren't proud to have the sisu? And no matter how we're tested, to have it. I think there's comfort in identifying with that and saying, I can get through this because I'm Finnish and I have that. So I had there was a day when I was competitive running, just amateur, you know, just doing it for fun in my 30s, and I remember running in a race and seeing the word Sisu painted on the road. And my partner, or a friend who was running with me, saw that, and I got very excited when I saw it, and she didn't know what it meant. And her husband had told her that it meant suck it in and straighten up. I said, S-I-S-U. And I said, that's Sisu. And we were running along, and I said, essentially, he has it right. It does indeed mean that. Take it in and keep going.